What if an ordinary meal suddenly turns into a deadly trap? In the center of Smithfield Square, steam rose from a cauldron. Today it would become the main character in a horror story that would be remembered for a long time. On the morning of April 5th, 1531, a leaden sky hung over London, as if the heavens themselves foresaw the madness to come. A huge crowd gathered in Smithfield Square, where once a year cattle were slaughtered and public executions were held. Market-goers and onlookers looked habitually at the scaffold and the executioner's noose. But today, in the center of the square, it was not a gallows that stood on stone slabs, but a giant copper cauldron set on a fresh pyre. The flames crackled, and the water in the cauldron gradually boiled, emitting an ominous hiss. A whisper ran through the rows of spectators as a bound man was led into the square. His name was Richard Rose, Bishop John Fisher's cook. Rose's pale face betrayed his terror. He seemed to realize that he was about to experience the impossible torment of being boiled alive and feeling the burning pain grow, dissolving the skin on every inch of his body. How did a simple cook from the bishop's palace end up on the path to such a brutal execution? To understand this truly grim story, let's go back a few weeks. In February 1531, England was experiencing one of the most turbulent crises in its history. King Henry VIII, tired of his barren marriage to Catherine of Aragon, was eager to form a new union with Anne Boleyn. His decision divided the aristocracy and the clergy. The king's supporters argued that the monarch had the divine right to choose his wife, while conservative priests strictly believed that marriage was sacred and indissoluble. One of the fiercest opponents of divorce was Bishop John Fisher of Rochester, a man of strict moral convictions and an outstanding theologian who was respected for his honesty among both Catholics and humanists close to Charles V at the time. Bishop Fisher lived in constant fear for his life. In Lambeth, on the south bank of the Thames, where his residence was located, he slept in different rooms every night and only ate food that had been carefully checked, fearing that the metal of knives and plates might be poisoned. He had a staff of servants, valets, court priests, and a cook named Richard Rose, an unremarkable man of middle age, with simple features and a neat appearance, inconspicuous in the bustle of the vast houses of the lords and clergy. At 11 o'clock in the morning on February 18th, Rose began preparing a funeral dinner for the bishop's guests. The menu included a thick oatmeal soup, common in English cuisine at the time, a nutritious but simple dish loved by both rich and poor. According to the recollections of courtiers, the cook could hardly have imagined the horror that was mixed into the heavy spoonful of broth. He had secretly added powder to the soup. Later, under torture, Rose claimed that he thought it was just a laxative, a cruel joke that would cause excruciating intestinal cramps, but not death. Bishop Fisher tried only a handful of the soup. He was not very hungry. The other guests devoured their plates. When the meal was over, as was customary, the leftovers were distributed to the beggars standing at the entrance gate. Among the poor were Bennet Kerwin and Alice Trippitt, who rejoiced at the hot food they had received from the kitchen of the high clergyman. However, it soon became impossible to quell the pain in their stomachs. Everyone who had eaten the soup was seized by sharp cramps, vomiting, and cold sweat. Fisher, who had tasted very little, remained relatively safe, but the other guests were on the verge of life and death. Bennet and Alice suffered particularly badly. The next day, their bodies were found broken, as if their bones had been broken not by the executioner's hand, but by the pain itself. News of the mass poisoning spread like wildfire throughout London. King Henry VIII, upon learning of the incident, flew into a rage. Despite his enmity with Fisher, he understood that if such atrocities were being committed in the presence of bishops, no one at court would be safe. The monarch demanded an immediate investigation. Richard Rose was captured while trying to flee the city. Shackled in chains, he appeared before the guards in the Tower of London. There he was tortured on the rack, a gruesome device that stretched the bound victim to the limit. Under unbearable pain, Rose confessed that he had indeed put powder in the soup, but swore that he did not know of its deadly power. The case took an unprecedented turn. On February 28th, Henry VIII personally appeared in Parliament and declared the death of the beggars and the poisoning of the bishop an act of treason, a crime against the crown. Parliament, not wanting to spoil relations with the unpredictable monarch, unanimously passed the Act of Poisonous Culinary Attempts, which punished poisoning as treason and prescribed the punishment of death by boiling in boiling water. Thus, Richard Rose was sentenced to one of the most horrific deaths imaginable. He was to be slowly boiled in a large cauldron in Smithfield Square, demonstrating to all that even simple servants were not safe from the wrath of a king willing to retroactively enact new laws to intimidate his enemies. Are you ready to see royal cruelty turned into a public spectacle? Imagine the carnage. A man dragged to the place of execution, doomed to be slowly boiled in a huge cauldron. In 1535, a crowd gathered at the viewing platform in Smithfield. To the sound of church bells, the condemned Richard Rose, a simple royal cook, was dragged away on a horse-drawn cart. He was hanged until he was almost unconscious, stripped naked, beheaded, and quartered. But even this seemed insufficient to the king himself. Henry VIII was terrified of poisoning, considering it a base and cowardly way to take a life. Therefore, the cook's sentence was supplemented with the rarest form of torture, boiling in boiling water so that every muscle would burn in the fire. What happened? The essence of the matter lies in rumors and mysterious motives. The extensive letters of the imperial ambassador mention the chaplain of Prince Fisher, a longtime ally of Queen Catherine of Aragon. He hinted that Henry wanted to divert suspicion from himself and Anne Boleyn and her father, the powerful Lord Thomas Boleyn. The poisoning of Bishop John Fisher, a fierce opponent of the break with Rome, threatened to disrupt the king's plans for a new marriage. According to rumors at the time, the Boleyn family allegedly hired Rose to eliminate Fisher as the main obstacle to Henry's union with the young Lady Anne. Following the dismal rumors, farmers from the suburbs and craftsmen on the streets of London quickly spread the word. The Boleyns had paid the treacherous cutter, Richard, and now the price was too high to simply investigate. That was why the king ordered the truth to be told publicly, in an exemplary manner, with no chance of further questioning. On the 5th of April, people began to gather in the morning. Brittles formed a circle. Merchants sold barley ale and roasted corn, as if it were a fair day. In the center of the square, a huge bronze cauldron was already bubbling. Salted wood mixed with manure and medicinal herbs was boiling in it so that the body would cook evenly. The priest hastily recited a short prayer for the repose of the wretch's soul, after which the executioners, in the presence of the guards, threw Rose down naked. It was the last act of mercy. The thick layers of skin on his ankles immediately curled up, and the man screamed so loudly that the bells echoed in response. The first dip. Only his legs were submerged up to the knees. Bubbles of blood rose from the water, and the spectators almost lost consciousness. The second time, the cauldron took his torso up to his chest. The transparent yellow liquid turned crimson, and the screams remained only a hoarse gurgling. On the third dip, Rose was plunged headfirst into the hot lava, and a moment later, the cruel torment ended. Death, though terrifying, freed him from the captivity of pain. The execution of Richard Rose was not the last such case. After a new law against poisonous murder was passed in 1542, other slow criminals were boiled alive in the same place. Among the victims was Margaret Davis, who was accused of poisoning 3 families, and the bubbling cauldron of Smithfield once again accepted a human being. Officially, boiling alive was abolished only under King Edward VI as part of judicial reforms aimed at softening punishments. But Rose's case remained one of the darkest in the annals of the Tudors. It shows how politics and fear of treason turned England into an arena of brutal public executions. Bishop John Fisher, for whom it all began, did not escape punishment either. In 1535, he was beheaded for refusing to recognize Henry as head of the Church of England, and his head was displayed on London Bridge as a warning to others. Anne Boleyn, for whom poisoning was a kind of prologue to the throne, would find herself on the scaffold a year later on the same charges of treason and indirect involvement in dishonor. Henry, meanwhile, continued to wander between marriages and breakups with Rome until his own cruelty turned the kingdom into an empire of fear. Today, at Smithfield Market, alongside market stalls and cafes, there is not a single plaque commemorating how people were slowly boiled to death here. But as you walk through the noisy streets, try to imagine. Beneath your feet, the street still hides a horrific story about a man who was burned in a cauldron on the whim of a king. When you are left as seasoning for your own cauldron, it is no longer a metaphor, but a deadly reality. This grim fate befell the cook Richard Rose in 1531. This story is reminiscent of a time when justice and cruelty went hand in hand, and King Henry VIII could rewrite the law to suit his mood with a single decree. Intrigue was rife at court, and the monarch hastened to lobby Parliament for a harsh anti-poisoning law, expanding the circle of suspects to include ordinary servants and laymen. At that time, the value of human life was measured solely by the political gain of someone's death. Today, no one really knows whether Richard Roose was truly guilty, whether he became a scapegoat in a court conspiracy, or whether, by a fatal accident, he mixed poisonous plants, hemlock or yew, which in those days could not be distinguished from ordinary spices, into the soup. Only one thing is clear: his punishment exceeded all notions of justice, even by the harsh standards of the 16th century. Roose was ordered to pour boiling water into a cauldron and was boiled alive. The term boiling itself took on a sinister irony. A man who had devoted his life to cooking in huge cauldrons became an ingredient in one of them. This was not simply the elimination of a criminal, but a terrifying poetic revenge designed to instill fear and demonstrate the absolute power of the monarch. Almost 5 centuries have passed since then. Our world has changed beyond recognition, and modern judicial systems, although imperfect, strive for rehabilitation rather than revenge. Today, the law must apply equally to all, and torture of those convicted is officially prohibited. Nevertheless, the story of Richard Rouse, boiled alive in Smithfield Market on a cold April day in 1531, reminds us how thin the line between civilization and barbarism can be. The echoes of those cries still resound beneath the hollow footsteps of modern London. And if you listen closely, you can hear the echoes of cauldrons, where, instead of food, a sinister justice was prepared.